Good evening. Welcome to Hand Up Recovery Home Show again, where we do a myriad of things, but our primary purpose is to help change lives and save families. Our ultimate goal. We've started off doing basically recovery services for those recovering from alcoholism, substance abuse. Occasionally we got a gambler in there or two, and sometimes we got a straight up pothead or two. Now marijuana legal, they may not be coming to treatment as soon as they used to. Just like with alcohol, because it's legal, some people will stay out in the horrors of their addiction longer, thinking because social acceptability means that they have control because everybody else, quote, doing it. Because everyone else, quote, doing things does not mean that you have control over the substance or the alcohol. It may well still have control over you. But unfortunately, those things will happen. What we must do in the recovery community is realize legalization does not reduce the propensity for marijuana to destroy lives as much as alcohol. For one, it is considered the second avenue of gateway drugs. Two is that sometimes you can be more dormant and more slothful and more slow, procrastinate more on marijuana than any other drugs, or just as much so. So it can have its negative effect on a person, on a family, especially if it interferes with a person's productivity. Now, let's look at how that transpired into other spiraling destruction in the community. I think, and this is my opinion, that some of the increased stealing of cars again in Chicago, increased carjacking, increased thefts is a direct result in the inner city of the loss of marijuana revenue on the streets. See, people, when they think about legalizing for the purpose of potentially stopping crimes, and it did. It stopped crime that didn't have as much violence associated with it and selling of marijuana most of the time. But what it did was put a lot of people in the streets out of some work. Some people actually used to try to stay out of the penitentiary by selling marijuana versus heroin, cocaine. When you're in communities that are struggling, you get to find out some of these hidden secrets of how I best reduce my chance of doing long penitentiary time. Well, the goal should be to keep them out the penitentiary, but also how do you transition from illegal marijuana to legal marijuana and leave the people who were most employed by that avenue and stream of employment in the street and not add them to your work pool when you go legal. So here again, struggling people, marginalized people, poor people, people who are given street drugs to sell. Given, I really mean that, given. It's no accident that marijuana gets in the community. It's no accident cocaine gets in the community. It's no accident heroin gets into our communities. And they don't put another Nike store in there as much as we buy Nike. They don't put another FUBU store back in the day when I was younger. But now they don't put a Louis Vuitton store in the neighborhood. They don't put any Calvin Klein stores in the neighborhood and Levi's and all of that. They don't put those stores back in the neighborhood, but a lot of people still spend plenty of money on that. They don't put the jewelers in the neighborhood, but we know that people making money in the streets like jewelry. They don't put some decent and hardly any car dealers or reputable car dealers with lower interest rates in the community. Again, they perpetuate predatory lending to those of us who buy many cars and more than our fair share per capita, as well as income levels. So it's different things that contribute to the crime problem that contributes to the violence. And I think we have to stop having everybody study. One, implement the good studies, and two, spend the money on the people struggling in the community, lifting them up with more job training that equals a job. Not job training for the sake of somebody making money training you while you end up unemployed after the training. I think one of the greatest opportunities is the different skill levels. One is nursing. Just ran into Dr. Sanders from Malcolm X, the president of Malcolm X, in the corridor heading in here, and he is very adamant in educating our people, educating our children, educating our young adults, even educating those that are older who want a new trade and a new opportunity to enhance their skill level. They have one of the best nursing programs, medical programs, and they do great at teaching people how to transition from being out in the streets and into developing a relationship whereby they can actually become counselors. They have one of the best substance abuse counseling programs in the city, probably in one of the better ones in the country. They have more than enough people to help out in the communities of Chicago. They have various other programs that are very instrumental, mathematics programs, science programs. They have a state-of-the-art facility. They have a lot of resources. I think they also have developed a pretty good media program and one of the best printing presses where they can get out more material, more graphics and things of that nature to help community groups to enhance the skill level that they're putting out where people can go on a trade, learning how to do the graphic designs that are necessary to help do the marketing for so many organizations and groups. So it is it's a wonderful opportunity to join Malcolm X College and many of the other city colleges. It is where you can save money, get great skills, save money, get the first 2 years of your academic education out the way at limited cost. Things that sometimes perpetuate people going back to these struggling communities and sometimes ending up in the street life. It is very important that we use all avenues to help people avoid the violent nature of street life. But first and foremost is avoid street life, feeling that their best options for employment is in the streets of Chicago or streets anywhere in the nation, to stop them from being able to more easily secure a job selling heroin, selling cocaine, selling what marijuana market still left, selling pills, stealing cars, robbing people, committing armed robberies, committing carjacks and vehicle hijacking, which is when you make somebody get out their car and then take the car. Then sometimes if you mess around and you get a child or you get a person that you don't realize in the car, that becomes kidnapping. So all these things as a result of feeling you have to survive in the streets of Chicago and the poor communities create an avenue for more violence. And a lot of it starts and centers around the drug epidemic that we knew about in the 70s. How do we get from 1970, I'm in grammar school in 8th grade, and they showing this thing like Lean On Me, the Fabulous song, and showing all the drug dealing, the heroin use, and the teas and blues. And my first major introduction to that, grammar school in a movie to try to help prevent us from going down that road. But Lake Street in Chicago and other urban poverty centers, they didn't help infuse more opportunities for economic development. Matter of fact, they systematically took money that was sent for blighted communities, poor communities in urban areas, and they redistributed that money into what we now call the great near west side that we're in part of. And downtown Loop was rebuilt 2-3 times over. They redid State Street 3 times, 4 times in the last 20 years, but they did not recreate a better avenue for employment out in the communities, and they didn't bring the community members down here in the Loop, in the near west side to work so that they didn't end up more of them going to the penitentiary and becoming more violent or living in the streets of Chicago trying to make it in illegal avenues of employment, including marijuana at the time. And then now the goal is, how do we transition all those people that got 20, 30, 40 years for a nonviolent offense of selling marijuana in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010, up to 2020 roughly. And how do we get them out of the penitentiaries and into gainful employment immediately? Now, Cook County is doing better than many places across the country that have legalized marijuana and getting people out of the jails, but getting them into gainful employment is the next step. And how do you do that? How do you reintroduce people you've stuck in jail for a nonviolent offense? We're in a lot of communities where they have access to capital, middle class, upper crust especially, and rich communities. These people didn't see 4 or 5 years of jail time, if any jail time. But these same inner city people, for even nonviolent offenses, get 10, 20, 30 years. Matter of fact, many murderers got out before the nonviolent drug dealers. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. Many people who have committed murder are back on the streets of Chicago faster than those who sometimes sell drugs or oftentimes have sold drugs. Unless they're considered, one of the major criminal enterprises and that did multiple murders, a lot of them don't get more than 10, 15 years unless it's a crime in a middle, upper crust, or rich community and they're African American descent or Latino descent, then they get 30 to 100 years immediately. It's like the unwritten rule that's a rule. So these inequities contribute to a lot of the violence, a lot of the negative feelings, and now it's created a whole aura of not trusting the police, not trusting the justice system. And we could ill afford in an already violent community of Chicago and other urban areas to have people not trust the legal system. But how can you when it's been so one-sided against you? How can you when it's been a 2-3 tier justice system and you're always on the bottom getting slammed and stepped on by the system for what improprieties you have, while you hear, watch, see, especially in this age of technology, so many rich people get away with a slap on the wrist? How can you when you realize that many in your community do not own the railroads, do not own the bus stations, do not own the plane aircrafts, do not own the ships on the ocean, but drugs are everywhere in your community? And they keep saying it came from the south borders, came out of Mexico, or it came from overseas in China. How does something from China or from Iran or from Afghanistan, how do those drugs get all the way to the streets of Chicago when most of our wealthiest black folks are athletes? So somebody else controlled the drug trade, plus they don't operate in foreign countries to get it out. So how do we get this proliferation of drugs that contribute significantly to the violence in the poor communities of Chicago, especially on the west side? Some of these questions, we know the answer, but are we dealing with that? It's so much easier to incarcerate poor black people in the city, poor Latino people in the city, even some poor white folks. Most of them don't get incarcerated. They don't even get picked up. Even when they found with drugs, they'll throw their drugs. We see it all over the west side. They'll throw their drugs in the drain and let them go. Or they can keep their drugs and tell on the black drug dealer down the street they cop from. Or they take them out of our area on the west side, because I know some people I helped in recovery, and they will go out to the south side, south suburbs, and become an informant, and they go buy drugs, help bust those drug dealers. Then they free to go with and they keep the drugs, they get a few dollars, and they back on the west side, back copping again. It's not what I heard. This is what I was told by a few Caucasian gentlemen who I was trying to help recover from alcoholism and substance abuse, primarily substance abuse. And they told me how they get used in their addiction to help build cases. You know, and it seems like a good out, especially on my favorite show, Chicago PD, you know, to have informants and all of that. But if it's just to get the low level, what you call low level, poverty-ridden drug dealers on the streets of Chicago and further give them more, an X on their back, another nudge in the wrong direction, another anchor holding them down from becoming more successful and getting out of the muck and mire of poverty. We gotta go figure, is it worth that? But also, why we don't go after more white-collar criminals, the ones that bring in the boatloads? Because that's where the real help comes from. If we can reduce the livelihood of substance abuse and create more jobs in construction, more jobs in solar panel transition for homes, more jobs in carpentry and plumbing for these men and women on the streets hustling, they will leave the streets. Why? Because I know dozens who have. They've left street life for a decent job. What we call a living wage we've been fighting for in Chicago, and we have now, even though livable wages keep moving up, like affordable housing keep getting more expensive. So, but those are some things we'll talk about later that help contribute to the struggle. Homelessness contributes to the struggle of living in the streets, contributes to the violence, contributes to substance abuse. It's many people who weren't alcoholic or weren't drug addicts until they one day lost their good job, decent job, and fell in disrepair and lost their homes. And then they became alcoholics. Social drinking no longer became an option. It wasn't enough to dull the pain of having fallen so far from that little bit of American prosperity they were starting to enjoy, working 20, 30 years. Now they have no job because of different financial maneuvers of the executives in high places. It's really important that we look at all the issues and not just a few. Now, if I know this as a layperson and I have a regular day job with county government and I also work in the community and I also do ministry, now if I can figure out some of these things and if I can try to be an answer to some of those questions, why is our society so behind on this? Like I said, they were showing the movie about substance abuse, drug addiction, heroin addiction in 1978 when I was coming out of grammar school. And how do we end up in 2024 with as bad or worse issues with substance abuse in these cities and it wasn't dealt with? But that background behind me, how well they've helped keep, expand, increase, redevelop downtown. But they're just getting to these communities on the west and lower south sides of the Chicago and some north side communities away from the lakefront. But also they're pushing the struggling people who they left in struggles for 30, 40 additional years. They're pushing them out of those communities. Why did development have to cost them their livelihood, cost them their community, cost them their way of life? The positive ones, because the negative ones are already in the penitentiary. The negative ones are already in the graveyard, those that live those lives. And the sad part is, while some of those died because of their negative lifestyles, what we call negative, trying to survive in the streets, and illegal lifestyle, so many innocent folks didn't need to die along with them. Sometimes just as many innocent folks die because of the pain we left in poor communities. Good kids that could have been very instrumental in helping change the the poverty in their communities. Good kids that could have helped raise even better children. Good kids and parents that lives were cut short by the violence of poverty in urban areas that lead to the shootings over drugs, the shooting over mental health issues unaddressed, the shootings because they don't trust the justice system. There's too much that at stake for us not to be more serious about helping. And as for political aspirations, I believe everyone should vote. But if neither party does any better dealing with these 70, 80-year-old issues in inner city America, America is in trouble. And it's not because of any leadership at the top. It's because the lack of leadership throughout the system of governments, local, state, federal, national, international. So if we're serious about violence, let's help change the poverty in the communities. Peace out, everyone. Have a great week.